All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Leaders of Next podcast, and I'm really excited today. We're based in Detroit. Detroit is built on hustle, and so is our guest today. Todd Lansky created Detroit Army to represent the unbreakable spirit of a city that never stops grinding. And this isn't just athletic streetwear; it's a statement. Every piece carries the energy of Detroit streets, its stories, and the people who keep it moving forward. Todd, can't wait to hear your story. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Gary. I couldn't have said it better myself. So that's a wonderful introduction and conveyance of our theme and our story. But yeah, it's been a unique journey for sure. As you know, I'm a Detroit guy by trade that has since moved to Chicago back in '95 for law school. And Detroit's this unique spot, of course. A lot of people grew up there. Many didn't come back. So the roots and the connection of Detroiters is special. There's a special bond. There's a special connectivity to it. So inevitably, a number of my close friends from growing up in Detroit also moved to Chicago. And so as we, carried on our lives, we certainly became friends with a number of good Chicago buddies, always played sports together. And the common theme was that the Detroit guys always stick together. It's just the way it was. Loyal, strong, tough, gritty. And so, we'd play a lot of sports together, whether it be football, basketball, hockey. And, the bonds just kind of carried on. And until it was about 15 years ago, there was a basketball tournament that was held up in Eagle River, Wisconsin at Camp Ojibwa. It actually was commemorating one of our friends from Chicago that had passed away on the court. Oh, and wow. We built, my friend Darren Annixter built a basketball tournament in his honor called the Brian P. Schwartz Tournament. And the first year of the tournament, of course, the Detroit guys were going to stick together. So the Detroit guys needed a team name and a logo, and the Detroit Army was formed, right? I mean, this was sort of a play off of the Russian Red Army and the Red Wings back in the 90s. And the Detroit Army made its appearance at this basketball tournament against a lot of the Chicago guys. And over time, it started to just kind of build momentum and traction as a lot of my friends my age sort of stopped playing hoops. The tournament continued to grow and evolve. And so we would recruit new guys into the Army almost every year, and the brand began to build. So year one, I made gear for our team. By year 2 and 3, I was making gear not only for our team, but those at the tournament that they wanted to support it. They loved the cause. They loved the gear, and they wanted Detroit Army swag. And so
now, wait. So back up. So I'm picturing a bunch of guys playing basketball, and then afterwards, you're having a beer or whatever you're doing. And did you guys brainstorm? How did? Because it sounds like you're kind of the lead guy, but I'm just curious. Were you spitballing names? And
it kind of just evolved. Like I said, I mean, I some of our friends in Chicago, they would certainly categorize us together as sort of a tight knit Army unit, and the Detroit Army name was formed. And as I was, I think I may have told you in the past, Gary, I'm sort of a gear guy by trade, and so made T-shirts for my fraternity in college, and just always liked sort of the visual and the aesthetic of cool T-shirts. And so came up with the logo, and it kind of caught on, and people, almost more on the Chicago side started to support it. But I would also give gear to family members of those that had served on the Army, so to speak, over the years. And so, Mother's Day, I'd give the wives of the players, Detroit Army sweatpants. I'd give it to, of course, my family members, and they'd be wearing Detroit Army gear in other cities. My sister, I think, was in LA, and she's wearing Detroit Army gear, and her friends from home basically said, how do I get Army gear? And I said, well, basically, I'm making it for this basketball tournament. But the thought really at that time, Gary, was that I really started to believe there was a bigger connection piece, and almost broader than certainly the basketball tournament and my core of friends, was seeing Detroit as this connection piece and this place that grew up as sort of an underdog city and people sort of banding together. And so I really felt like, sure, there was a play there whereby I think we could make apparel and start building the brand that way, but also as a connection piece and a way to connect Detroiters and ultimately give back to the city that kind of gave us our grit and our history and our mantra. And so I trademarked it. I trademarked the term Detroit Army with the logo that we created. And, I'm an attorney by trade, so I don't have a whole lot of time to run a merch business on the side. But nonetheless, I felt like there was value out there, and so I trademarked it. And sort of long story short, 5 years went by, and if you don't utilize your trademark or put it into commerce, it expires. And so that's when my daughter, Zoe Lansky, comes into play here, as she's, a high school girl at the time, pretty big into the social media front. And we had the thought, she really did, to see if there's something there with this unique brand, and really trying to turn it into a business. And so before she left for college, this was in 2021, to ensure that we utilized the trademark and put it into use, we launched a website together, and the Detroit Army storefront was formed. And it's certainly taken on a life of its own since then as we've grown it. My daughter then moved off to college, and as I think we've discussed in the past, has completely abandoned ship. And I was left, after her guidance, trying to build Instagram posts and stories at the time. And ultimately, Gary, we got in touch with a couple of agents that I know and started to send some care packages to Detroit-based athletes and coaches. And certainly some of the athletes wear the gear, but the one that really hit was Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Detroit Lions, and a good friend of mine is his agent. And he just, kind of epitomized everything that the brand was about: tough, resilient, gritty, strong. And he took a liking to the gear, and lo and behold, about a year in, we saw him wearing it at a press conference.
I was going to say, I've seen some of the social media posts and videos of Dan, wearing pretty much the same hat I'm wearing, right? The original D.
It's a good looking hat. Looks great on you, and it looks great on him.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not that good looking, but this hat increases me by a lot. But Dan, Dan, to your point, I mean, when you think about this, the apparel business is such a competitive business. Everybody, like you said, almost anybody with a basement or garage can print stuff, right?
Yep.
But you made this unique because of the tie to the community, and Detroiters are so proud, as you mentioned, and Dan fits that perfectly. And I know he's not a Detroiter, really. I mean, he coaches now, but I mean, the grit, the determination, the passion. You couldn't have found a better spokesman. And to be clear, he's not a guy that gets paid to wear this stuff, right?
No, he's not, and he's not a social media guy. He simply took a liking to it, and fortunately for us, his press conferences are picked up by a number of different sports outlets, and he also oftentimes will wear it to and from games, as will some other coaches and athletes. But yeah, I mean, it's been, certainly a unique rise, as obviously the popularity and the growth of the Detroit Lions has coincided sort of with the growth of our brand. And so we really started to see, sales pick up during the football season. And, 2 years ago, when the Lions made it to the NFC Championship, we were fortunate enough that, Dan Campbell was doing an interview on a national broadcast with Michael Strahan on NFL on Fox prior to the game. And that was the first time that it really was sort of visualized by a national audience, because a lot of the press conferences and or photos that are released by the Lions or otherwise are obviously picked up by local media markets and outlets, but not really to the national, audience, so to speak. And so I was at the NFC Championship game 2 years ago with my youngest son, Tyler, and my phone was ringing off the hook. And people, I responded to some of the inquiries, and people were saying, what's going on at the game? Is Dan Campbell on the Jumbotron? And I said, no, I got wind that he apparently wore the gear during the interview with Strahan. And this is sort of, Gary, what I realized, the power of social media and influencer marketing is that, that this number is etched in stone in my head, is that we had 379 sales in 3 minutes. And, nice. it definitely changed the landscape, for us, just from a visibility perspective. But the goal for us was, this is a great stepping stone and a great piece, and we've since utilized that to continue to grow the band and the brand, and obviously working organically within the Detroit community, the local Chicago community, and we've built the following, and there's certainly a lot of room to grow in this arena, but it's been a really fun ride as we've navigated down the path, for sure.
The New York Times can write about a lot of things, but a while back they chose to write an article about, of all things, Detroit Army, this fledgling company that you've created. I mean, how the heck did they find you, and how'd that come about?
Yeah, so that was unique, and this came about December of last year, and obviously the Lions had a pretty successful season, and I know that they were looking at doing an article on Detroit and the Lions, but it's the New York Times, so they want to do something different. And I was in contact with one of the editors there that's not involved in the sports or fashion piece, but she referred me to one of the editors there. And so I think what they gravitated to was, again, sort of the organic nature of this story, sort of coinciding the ride of the Lions and what was behind this brand. And so they interviewed me for probably about an hour and a half, and this was like I said, in early December, not knowing what would come of it. And they called back, I guess, right before New Year's, and really were intrigued by the story, wanted to come out and do a photo shoot, interview, Rick Smith, Dan's agent, my daughter, who was involved as well, and still not knowing whether it gets published or not. There's a lot of things that have to go right, but we got the call a week into the playoffs that they were going to run the story. And so it was a huge deal. We were honored, obviously, to be featured, and it's sort of, the gift that keeps on giving. It covers a pretty wide, base and hits a wide audience, but it's been the unique connections that I've gained from it, just from different, whether it be followers or media outlets in different cities that saw the story and they're from Detroit and they want to learn more and how can they support it. And you never know what angle the New York Times or any of the publications are going to run with, but
Right.
but they really did nail it. I think they caught the father-daughter moment, which is really critical to how this all started with, me and my daughter building it and getting a push from her and her continued support. And so it really was amazing. And yes, it is obviously helped from a following perspective and sales. But it's the social media marketing is unique. You got to stay engaged. You've got to constantly be on it. And we are working tirelessly in the off season to start, obviously moving, in addition to Dan Campbell Alliance, but building up relationships with the Pistons and the Tigers and the Red Wings, as well as, the fine institutions in the great state of Michigan, such as Michigan and Michigan State, and really trying to identify, the connection pieces, whether it's those from Detroit that play sports, that have stories about growing up in the city. And it's just been interesting, sort of at every turn. Sort of a new feature, a new story will come of it. Recently my son Dylan, he graduated from high school, and there was a lot of his buddies are all going to different colleges, and so we made different colored college themed Detroit Army gear for them, and now that sparked a wave of high school graduate parents and college graduate parents reaching out for Detroit Army gear in the colors of their schools. So each day sort of takes on a different turn. But we think there's a great story to tell, and we're trying to connect the dots.
Well, it's a great story. It's obviously also a great amount of work. And as we've established earlier, you're a full-time lawyer. I don't think that's a 30-hour-a-week job, so you don't have a lot of free time. Your daughter, who helped you work with this, she left the nest, it sounds like, and she's off full-time with a job in New York. So how are you making all this happen as it continues to grow?
Well, it's a great question. So again, this is between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. But ultimately, I think it's building relationships, and fortunately was able to connect with you, Gary, and your son, and some of the affiliates with Leaders and Next. And relationships such as that are really an important way for me to grow the business. I think we can do a lot with social media, but supportive partners that can help us tell the story and articulate the story is really the direction that we're going. And so I've really been impressed with what you guys have done in Ann Arbor. And if there's a way that we can utilize athletes to help support the story, grow the brand, build the connection pieces, that's one of the prime examples of, I think, ways we can continue building it. And so, yeah, there's not enough time in the day, but it is certainly a passion project and a labor of love, to say the least. So we're just constantly looking at ways to evolve and grow it. And ultimately, there's a lot in Michigan, and I think even beyond that as well.
When people see, geographic area like Detroit, do you often hear people say, yeah, but I'm not from Detroit. So it's like, why would I do that? So what do you tell people that aren't from Detroit, not even from the Midwest? What would you say to them?
I think there's a few things. I mean, sure, I do get that. And I also get those actual servicemen and women that thank me for my support and service within the real United States Army. But that being said, the Detroit piece, I think it's one of those cities that it just resonates with people. Like I said, I mean, even my good Chicago buddies have supported this from day one, and Detroit and Chicago have been the biggest rivalries. That's really how this all started. Was, I moved to Chicago after Detroit won back-to-back and had to live through the Jordan years I'm still living through them. They're still talking about it, but nonetheless, the rivalry helps. But I think people support a good, authentic story. They support a good brand that I think, look, I mean, it's the story is one thing. People want cool gear also. And I think ultimately it's, can you use, unique and attractive gear to move and connect people? And that's sort of part of it as well. And so it's interesting. I would say we've got as many supporters outside of the city of Detroit as we do within the city of Detroit.
Oh.
And part of that is due to the fact that, as I had mentioned, there's sort of this diaspora where Detroiters, grew up there and they've since moved away. And they've then built friendships outside of the city of Detroit, unlike Chicago or New York, where I think a lot of the people that grow up there, they're such great cities, they move back. So because Detroiters have since moved away and you've got these expats in different areas, it's sort of, spreading the awareness, spreading the love. And I ultimately think, Gary, that people like an underdog story. And Detroit has certainly been that. They've been growing up in the city, the brunt of many, many conversations. And so I think it's all of that ties together. They want to support, hopefully me and my family and the story that we're trying to tell, the underdog Detroit story, represented by what we think is pretty cool gear, and all those sort of intangibles. Yeah. and tangibles, I guess, together have helped us kind of grow it beyond the city limits, if you will.
Well, I do think it's cool how you've tailored it to your point. I mean, to areas that aren't in Michigan, but also you tailor it to the schools. Obviously in Michigan, we got a couple big, Big Ten programs. We obviously support Michigan, and you made the Maize and Blue t-shirt, which is really love the t-shirt, by the way, and the colors. But I've seen on social media, you've got some with red in them. Luckily, they're not for Ohio State. I think they're for Wisconsin or maybe Nebraska, which is fine.
Yep. There's some Indiana and Wisconsin in there, but we'll leave the Buckeyes off the map for the moment.
There's plenty of other fish in we don't need to go fishing in Ohio. I wouldn't even do Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati.
We'll leave that alone for this podcast. That's
yeah. So if you, I guess last question, hey, a couple years from now or whatever, what's Nirvana look like for the brand?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, I think now it's been, as I've said, it's been an enjoyable, fun ride to kind of get to this point where I think, we're on the map and people are aware of it. And it's obviously to grow the following and continue to grow the connections. And so, sure, we'd like to get from 10,000 to 100,000 followers, but I think ultimately it's really going to be about building relationships with the right partners that can help articulate our story. I really think it's not just about selling merchandise or apparel. It's about articulating the story of Detroit and the brand itself, and trying to separate and identify ourselves from other products or brands in the marketplace, right? There's obviously a lot of colleagues and competitors in the sports, Detroit sports space and apparel, but we think we have something that's unique, and whether that's, really being authentic and genuine and true to ourselves and getting deeper into the city of Detroit and really, Gary, building the Army. I know that sounds cliche, but that's what we want to try to do, where we can identify those in Detroit that can tell their stories and sort of grow the Army organically.
Sure.
Through really good storytelling, because I think the city and its people have a lot to say, and of course that's not stuck to the city limits. Those are Detroiters across the country, and so for us, it's really going to be about, I think, collaborating and partnering with good people that can really help us elevate the brand through good storytelling, and really kind of separate ourselves from the marketplace with some authentic pieces, perhaps that move away from the traditional t-shirt, sweatshirt, sweatpant environment, into something that's really special that, like I said, can represent and exemplify how important the city of Detroit is to all of us.
Well, we hope we do our small part to help you guys, build the Army, and hope our listeners look. It's real easy. One way you can join the Army is simply follow them on Instagram. It's just the Detroit Army, one word, on Instagram. So feel free to give them a follow there, and you'll stay up to date on the latest with the Detroit Army. Visit the website. It's real simple, DetroitArmy.com. If you Google Detroit Army, you will get a Detroit Army brand, this one that we're talking about. But there's also some kind of armory, based in Detroit. Don't get confused with that, folks. Go to the DetroitArmy.com and support this city and the notion of kind of an unbreakable spirit that this brand represents. So thanks again, Todd, for sharing the story. It's wonderful, and we wish you the best.
Thank you so much for all the kind words, Gary. Appreciate you having me, and look forward to talking again soon.
All righty. And go blue.
Go blue.
Thanks, everybody.